Good evening, everybody. I'm Jackie Bothoris. I'm here from Corrigan Ventures with Maria Palma from RRE Ventures and Dan Kozakowski from First Mark Capital. And we're here to tell you guys a little bit tonight about NYC Blend and the initiative. We're all part of the organizing committee, and so we're excited to be here and dive into a little bit about what this is. So if we go ahead and get started, what is NYC Blend?
Sure. NYC Blend is a collaborative event series, and it aims to bring together different audiences within the venture and tech community in New York to really increase access, transparency, and education to building diversity and inclusion into growing and funding your business.
And so, Dan, can you tell us a little bit about why NYC Blend got started, and how did this all come about?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were catching up with a couple of our peer venture capital firms and thinking about things that we could do to meaningfully advance the conversation around diversity and inclusion and address some of the baseline issues. And we tested a couple of ideas. We went out to founders in our networks and asked them what they thought would actually make a difference, and ultimately settled on the event series that became NYC Blend. Today, we have over 80 venture capital firms from across New York City participating. When we launched Blend, we reached out to what we thought would be a handful of participating firms, and we were overwhelmed by the response. We've been thrilled to see what's come together.
Yeah, we felt like when we were having these conversations that a lot of venture firms kind of had their own disparate initiative, and we realized that from the community's vantage point, it was much better if we all collaborated. Rather than having female founders go to 10 different networking events, if we could all collaborate together. And one thing that we do with each event is we partner with an organization that's already doing great work to advance D&I within tech, whether it's Coalition for Queens or Lesbians Who Tech or Girls Who Code. We partner with them as we throw the event, and we try to bring really the perspectives of lots of different people as we think about the event series, whether or not it's sourcing diverse candidates, which might be targeted at sort of founders, hiring managers, and heads of talent and startups, or if we're talking about actually funding your company, it's really targeted at VCs and founders. So each event has a very specific audience.
That's great. So how does it work, and what should people expect from here?
Yeah, so each month we host a different event. Each event is themed. We pick a particular topic. Sometimes it may be a little more strategic. Sometimes it may be more tactical. We invite in speakers that could be researchers who've done work in that area. It could be experienced entrepreneurs or operators who have explored these issues in their own companies. We have a series of speakers who share ideas within that given theme. And above all, one of the most important things for us is that we create an environment where people can learn specific, actionable ideas, things that they can do the very next day that will make a dent and make an impact. That's been probably one of the most important principles we've adhered to as we think about this.
Yeah, that's great. Maria, can you tell us a little bit more about the first event and what that focused on?
Sure. The first event was on how do you create a culture that fosters and harnesses diversity and inclusion within your company. So that was everything, as Dan talked about, from the strategic, what are the frameworks and how do you think about this, to the tactical, how should I run a meeting tomorrow differently? How should I make a decision differently tomorrow to actually drive a better inclusive culture? Because we know that diverse teams perform better than non-diverse teams, but we also know you can't just put people from diverse backgrounds and perspectives in a room and expect that to happen, right? It's how do you actually create an inclusive culture where people feel like they can share their perspective when it's not the same. And so we actually brought in the experts to talk about that, and you'll be hearing a subset of that content today and hear from kind of our founders or heads of talent who are doing great work there, or hear about the data and kind of the why really behind why you should have a diverse and inclusive culture.
That's great. And Dan, can you tell us a little bit more about some of the other events that are coming up and topics that are near and dear to your heart?
Yeah, definitely. So the next event in April is going to center around mentorship and how to cultivate your own personal board, and you'll hear more about that later. A topic that I'm particularly passionate about is design, and we're hosting an event focused on designing products with D&I in mind. We also have an event on addressing unconscious bias at all levels of the organization, whether it's in the recruiting process or even in meetings or throughout the company culture. And you'll see those over the coming months. And if you want to find out more, I think we're going to talk about this in a second, but our site is nycblend.com.
That's great. And so how can people get involved? They go to nycblend.com. What do they do once they get there?
Well, you'll see a link for the upcoming event, so you can RSVP for that. We also have a mailing list that folks should sign up for, so you'll never miss an event going forward. And we love to hear from anyone in the community and ecosystem who wants to be a part of the events And we particularly love to hear from organizations that are doing meaningful work in and around D&I issues that would like to get involved with Blend to help make us stronger.
Yeah, one thing we've noticed already is it just helps to have a collaborative effort to create like a hub. And so if we can kind of put together resources of here's organizations that can help you source diverse candidates and things like that, we'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, that's great. We've been aggregating all of those resources already, and so it's easy for us to keep adding to that list and continuing on there. And I'm just thrilled about this. I think this is a fantastic initiative. I think New York is an incredibly diverse city, and I'm excited to see the VC and tech community really embrace that and try and mirror that in our own communities as well in the work that we do. So thank you both for your time. We really appreciate it. And next up is going to be Miriam Maima to tell us a little bit more about the why of diversity and inclusion. Thanks, everybody.
My Ellen DeGeneres moment right there with the music, so thanks for that. So happy to be here with all of you. My name's Miriam Maima. I'm a partner with Evolution. We're a culture and leadership development firm, so I get to be a coach and help people grow and companies and systems scale without losing touch with what their essence is and what really makes them tick. So it's extraordinary work. You may know this, but one great way to connect with people that you don't know is to share 3 random facts about yourself. So here we go. 3 random facts. I totally love surprises. I'm incredibly grateful for the work that I get to do in this world. I cannot explain the honor that it is to be let into people's worlds and really learn about what their struggles are and help them through that. And I'm a geek. I totally love to nerd out. I love studying very random, very complex concepts, and then I want to boil it down to something simple and actionable. So that's part of why I'm here today, is to talk about diversity and inclusion in that way. I'm going to throw out a few statistics. Imagine that no one would be spending any time on this, including watching this talk, if you didn't have some understanding of what's happening right now in the world. But just so you know, when we look at the globally venture-backed companies across the globe, 84% of them are founded by men, 10% by co-ed founding teams, and 6% by women. And that's similar in the United States as well. In the US, we can see that 76% of venture-backed companies are founded by people who identify as white, less than 1% by people who identify as African American. The statistics are similar, almost eerily similar, when we look at the statistics for executives in Fortune 500 companies. So I don't know about you, I don't like knowing that, and I don't like the fact that those numbers haven't changed in 5 years, even though there's a growing level of understanding of the importance of diversity. Even the people who are like, you know what, it's good business because it helps us attract good talent. It's the right thing to do. There's so much more to diversity and inclusion, but it's fascinating that the needle isn't moving, especially when we think about the fact that women control 85% of consumer purchases. And the estimated buying power of the African American community is $1.1 trillion. I do not think there's a single founder or a single investor who really wants to put themselves at a strategic disadvantage when they're thinking about, we want to create an executive team that does not mirror the people that we want to sell to. That's what we want to go out and do. So let's pretend and assume positive intent that none of this is happening intentionally. So then why the heck is the needle not moving, even though we're increasing the amount of time that we're spending on this important conversation? And ultimately, these numbers are the result of tens of thousands of seemingly small decisions that people are making on a day-to-day basis. And these decisions are not all conscious. This is where unconscious bias comes in. So unconscious bias to me is helpful to think about basically a circle. This is my conscious radar of what I think is influencing my decision. And anything that falls under unconscious bias is outside of that radar. So these are things that are influencing the decisions I'm making, but I can't rationally account for them because I don't understand them. Maybe I inherited them, maybe I picked them up along the way, someone rubbed me the right way, someone rubbed me the wrong way. But I have all of these opinions, but I'm not able to actually understand them. So I may think that I'm making a very strategic decision, But ultimately, I'm limited in the factors that I can take into consideration. So even when I think I'm telling myself, oh yeah, I'm really taking everything into account, I'm doing a great job at making a very informed decision, the truth is you're not. We're limited. Good news, unconscious bias is not static. It's absolutely dynamic, which is why personal awareness is the #1 driver for change in the conversation of diversity and inclusion. If you are not yet familiar with Project Implicit, please, please, please go to implicit.harvard.edu. It is a collaboration from universities across the globe, and you'll find some tests. And they're going to expose you to 2 images at a time, and you're going to have to select between the 2 images before you have an opportunity to rationalize which one you're choosing. So the result is you get a little glimpse into what your unconscious bias is. Okay. Let's get real. I went to this test and did it several years ago, and I was shocked. I was really embarrassed by the results. And like I said, it's not static. So I have, as I became more aware of what was driving my decisions and the impulses that I was having, I was able to expand that radar. And once it's in our sphere of awareness, we can begin to influence it. And that's where we truly become available for an inclusive conversation or a culture of inclusivity. If you aren't familiar with The Wisdom of Crowds by Jason Serwisky, I highly recommend checking that out because it talks about once you are available for this inclusive conversation, what can happen at the crowd level, at the group level. And one interesting fact is that if we take the smartest person that we can find and we ask them some important, complex problem, and we take a homogeneous group, a group of people who look alike, and we ask them the same complex problem, even if they aren't even if their IQ isn't as high, they will actually perform better on that test, on whatever their math problem is. So what we know is crowds perform better than individuals across the board. But if you perhaps know about cognitive diversity or diversity of thought, Scott Page, who's a University of Michigan professor of complex systems, he's been able to dive into this research behind diversity in a different way. So a lot of us talk about diversity externally. What do people look like? What is their race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation? And all of that is important, but another whole dynamic to this conversation of diversity and inclusion is understanding cognitive diversity, meaning our internal diversity. How is it that we go about making mental models of the world? And that's partly influenced by our education, what kind of education we've had, what we've studied. It's also influenced by how we grew up, our experiences in the world. But all of that actually adds an important dimension because when we take that group that I talked about earlier and compare them to, so we take a homogeneous group and we take a cognitively diverse group, without exception, a cognitively diverse group will always outperform a homogeneous group. So only when we have cognitive diversity and we amplify this identity diversity can we really start to unleash the potential power that diverse groups have. So how does this show up in startup ecosystem? Well, I don't know about you, but I find that we are facing a lot of complex problems. We're facing problems and questions like, how is it that we even measure our total addressable market? How is it that we create a business model for monetization? How do we go about customer acquisition? Within our product roadmap, which features are we going to prioritize? What's a timeline that's acceptable? Those are a few examples that my clients are wrestling with on a daily basis. So how does this play out? Well, I see a lot of executive teams that look a lot like each other. They have educations that are a lot like one another. So when I'm at an offsite with a group of people and they look around and they think, yeah, you look like me. Yeah, you think like me. And they enjoy being around each other and they come with one of these big questions. Let's say, what's our business model for monetization? One of them will come up with idea A, and one of them will come up with idea B. And when there's a culture of inclusivity, they will actually build off of one another. And then they might come up with idea C and come out of that room with a really great idea. Side note, when inclusivity is missing, they'll actually debate. They'll point out what's missing about the other idea, they'll point out the weaknesses, they'll really build up their idea, and then eventually someone will have to come in and make a call. So they actually aren't even being able to leverage the diversity in the group, meaning they aren't able to come up with a new idea. The difference is when I'm with executives at an offsite and they look different from one another. They look around and maybe there's someone that's a customer. Maybe there's someone with a design background, someone with an engineering background, someone who's a serial entrepreneur, so on. They look different, they think different, and someone comes in the room and says, same question, what's our business model for monetization? Someone says A, and then someone else says 3. And A and 3, all of a sudden they're talking to each other and they're coming up with new ideas, and they come up with the idea yellow. Meaning it's so different than anything that anyone had thought of before they came in that room. And so they're truly able to unleash the power of building off of each other, and they're innovating in real time. So what we're seeing with the companies that we've been able to work with closely is that they're not only in the headlines because they've actually moved the needle. The numbers, the statistics within their communities is different. It better represents the community that they're aiming to serve. But they're also in the headlines because they actually are the fastest growing startups, not only because of annual recurring revenue, but also daily active users. So this stuff really does work. And the thing is, it's going to take all of us to begin to moving the needle. So as I said, personal awareness is the #1 driver for change in this conversation. So I'm going to ask all of you to begin looking in the mirror and go to Project Implicit. Check out one of these books. Scott Page, his books, if you want to kind of dip your toe into the mathematics of this, I really like The Diversity Bonus. His first book, The Difference, is a little bit more rooted in the academic side, but also great. So go check out those books, but also find yourself in situations where you're with people who don't look like you and they don't think like you, and share 3 things about yourself and ask them questions to engage them so that they begin to know you, and you can actually walk out of that conversation having expanded your capacity for inclusion. And that's how we'll begin to move the needle, through tens of thousands of seemingly small decisions made by all of us. So do you remember the first piece of information I told you about myself? This is the part of the talk where you realize that this is all totally selfish. I love surprises. And I'm convinced that it is only through diversity and inclusion that we are going to begin to innovate and come up with products and services that really change the world. And I'm really excited. I want to figure out what is possible if we actually start creating cultures that have diversity and optimize for this diversity. It's like, yeah, what could happen if all of us go out there and we do this together? And NYC Blend is such a great example of competitors coming together in a way that was really inclusive and generated something that's never existed before, that we are all now benefiting from. So let's go see what we can do when we are acting with diversity and inclusion in mind. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight? Good? Doing well? Great, great. Well, my name is Jillian Reed, and I'm a principal at Rich Talent Group, which is a boutique executive search firm, and we work in the high-growth consumer tech space. We've got offices in San Francisco and an office here in New York that I run. Clients of ours, I'm sure you've heard of them, Warby Parker, Glossier, Facebook, Airbnb, Pinterest are just a few of those. And I would say really what our specialty is digital talent with a focus on diversity. So we've got Kathy Gutierrez here up on stage. We're really excited to have her here. We actually placed her in her role. She just started day 1 as the VP of People at Glossier, which...
This is how I spend my day 1, you know.
But prior to joining Glossier, Kathy was at AppNexus for a couple of years, and prior to that was at Accenture and Teach for America. So we're excited to have her up here. Not only is she joining a very, very cool digitally native beauty company, but she's got a really diverse set of experiences, and I think has a very strong point of view on the topic of inclusion. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. We only have about 15 or 20 minutes here, so I think we'll dive in. To ground the conversation, I think when we talk about diversity, a lot of people have an idea of what that is, and I think it often trends toward diversity that we can see from the outside. But I think what's really important is to consider, the diversities that we can't always see. So I will start off by sharing a diversity of mine that no one can see. But I'm an introvert, so as you can imagine, being up here is really, really fun for me. But tell us about, one of your diversities that maybe we can't see.
I think the one that I usually say is that I'm from Texas. I'm originally from San Antonio, and you can't really tell. I don't have an accent, but every once in a while you'll hear a y'all, come out of my mouth. But I would say that, being from Texas, I love being from Texas. I've been in New York for about 17 years now, but it's a conscious bias of mine, being from Texas, because when I review resumes, and I started off my career in HR as a recruiter, I would definitely look at my resumes and kind of note who was from Texas and immediately want to just hire them, right? So it's a very conscious bias that I definitely am aware of, and I get help with that a lot from other recruiters.
I like that, sort of a positive bias in
Yes.
some ways. And so diving in here, tell us, what does inclusion mean to you? How do you define it?
Yeah, I love to use a really simple quote from Vernee Myers. She's an amazing speaker on the topic of inclusion and diversity, and she describes it as diversity being invited to the dance, but inclusion is actually being asked to dance. And I just love that visual because it makes me think of a person who's at a dance who may be there, but they don't really feel like they belong. And so I go back to that quote a lot when I'm starting to think about strategies around diversity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so why do you care about inclusion? Is there a personal connection, or what's important about it to you?
I think it has a lot to do with, everybody has that experience of not feeling included, of not belonging. So I think we can all relate on an emotional level, but from a business perspective, I can absolutely, relate to that. Going into the beauty industry now, it's so important that the people that work at the company understand what it's like to have a different skin tone. So diversity is critical to, it's a business imperative, honestly. But you can't have diversity without inclusion. A good example is, I'm advising a fintech company right now, and they decided to bring in a set of interns, for female interns. And at the end of the summer, they made offers to all of them, and none of them accepted. And I said to the CEO, I said, hey, what happened there? Like 4, you're 0 for 4. And he said, I don't know. They just all went to, bigger places. And I said, well, do you have any women in your leadership team? No. Do you have other women that they can look up to and be mentored by? And no. So you can bring people in the door, but if you don't have that inclusive culture, they won't stick. And I think that that's, why inclusion is so important, I think, to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And knowing that you've worked in all different kinds of organizations, Teach for America, Accenture from a consulting perspective, AppNexus, which is, high growth tech company, and now going into Glossier, which you might not have an example after one day of work there. But, can you tell us about a couple things that you've seen work really well in organizations?
Yeah, I would say from an inclusion perspective, I think the number one thing that I've seen work is to listen to your employees. So a good example that I'll give from my time at AppNexus, we, this was July of 2016, I want to say, sometime about a year or so ago. And after the Orlando shootings, we had a number of our LGBTQ people from that community come to me directly and say, Kathy, I'm really upset about what happened. I can't focus at work. I just want to go home. People were having a really tough time with the violence that was happening against these particular groups. And so they wanted to have an open forum at the company, and I said, my initial reaction coming from kind of consulting and being a little bit more buttoned up was, this seems really risky. I'm a little worried about this. This could go sideways really quickly. But I decided to kind of trust them and trust that the culture could support an open forum of this type. And so within 24 hours, we got a bereavement counselor in to kind of moderate the discussion, and we just invited the entire company to join. And a number of people attended. People just shared their thoughts and kind of feelings and what they were feeling at work. And it was incredibly cathartic, and people were able to take that moment, grieve and just be sad at work, and then go on and start working again. And it taught that particular instance really taught me that it was important to listen to your employees, because they're going to tell you what they need, and that really opened up kind of a series of open forums that we ended up having at AppNexus.
And it sounds like it was almost a grassroots effort of a bunch of the employees coming together. Anything else you can share around what the rest of the leadership team or the executives team reaction was to that? Because I think in some organizations you have perhaps more junior employees requesting something, but if you don't have support from the top, it's going to be pretty impossible to get it done.
Yeah, I think we were really fortunate in that we had a leadership team who was incredibly bought into inclusion and diversity, so it wasn't a difficult sell, and it was at no cost to the company, right? It's free. An hour of time is free, right? It's just 1 hour, and people weren't working anyway, right? Because they were thinking about this. So I think it's a tougher sell if you don't have it at the top, and so thankfully we did have it there.
And switching gears a little bit, I think topic of conversation. I work in the recruiting industry. We hear the words culture fit a lot, and we hear those words described to disqualify a candidate because they might not look like the executive team, sound like the executive team, have worked at the same companies as the executive team. And quite honestly, I do think it is an excuse for leaders to get around diversity in some cases, but we're increasingly moving towards a conversation around culture add. So, tell us your thoughts on this topic of culture fit versus culture add.
Yeah, I had a great head of recruiting at my previous company introduce this concept to me, and I absolutely love it. The idea that fit is that F word that you cannot say in recruiting. I have to say it's one that's been pretty taboo for a number of years, and from all of my some of my other recruiting leaders, and that's mostly because it implies that you don't fit in with us the way we are, and that we're pretty exclusive about who we bring in. Whereas the notion of culture add is more about, wow, what can this person bring that's different than the person I just hired? How are they different? It focuses more on the kind of tapestry or the diversity of what that team is going to look like, and I think that that's great. And so I actually, was just talking to Emily and their COO and President Henry about how we need to start bringing that mindset into hiring managers as they start to hire for their teams. Like, this person needs to be a culture add as opposed to a culture fit, and I think that's just a mindset that would be prudent for most hiring managers to take on.
And for first-time founders or for people who are starting to build their companies, this idea of culture add, what are a couple of things that they might need to think about, whether that's coming up with company values in terms of what does culture add mean inside of this organization? Any practical tips that we can take away?
Yes. Well, first off, you should have company values. I think that that's incredibly important. Defining your mission, your purpose, and the values of the company will help to really instill and just solidify what's important to you as a founder and what's important to your company. What are the behaviors that you will accept, and what are the behaviors you will not accept? So having a baseline of core values or company values is critical, and I would encourage people, you don't have to have a huge recruiting team, but to include the core values as part of your interview process. So if one of your core values is, and I remember this from Teach for America, at the time it was relentless pursuit of results, and the acronym was RPR, for example. And so we would interview specifically for that core value because it was so critical to the success of being at the company. And so I think you have to have a core value interview. It's so important, and that will help to distill out the people that perhaps, will not live up to the company values and you don't want to have within your four walls.
Mm-hmm. And so as companies start to bring more diverse voices to the table, I think what we're hearing from companies is, well, the more diversity we bring around the boardroom, the more conflict we're starting to have, and conversations are becoming more difficult, and it's becoming more difficult to come to a conclusion. Any advice around, with increased conflict in meetings and around boardroom tables as to, what people can try to do to manage through that?
Yeah, I think if you don't have people disagreeing with you in the room, you're in a lot of trouble as a founder and as a leadership team. You should be hearing people having opposing views, and the whole notion of psychological safety is really important. And so that's just a notion that says, hey, you should feel comfortable giving your ideas, speaking up, having different views from the people around the table, and to have that level of comfort to do that. So I think the way that leaders have to move through that is another thing Vernay said, which was listen to be changed. And I love that. I love that idea of, if I listen to be changed, then that means I'm putting aside some of my known biases about this person or that idea. And just, anytime I find myself fighting off somebody's idea, I think, okay, let me just stop and listen to be changed. And then it helps a ton. So it's a bit of a mindset shift, and you're going to have to make it, and your company is it's the stake of the company really on the line if you don't allow different voices kind of in the room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think to build off of that point, in the past year or so, in this increasingly, polarized political climate that we've been coming into, we've had a lot of founders step out and, openly support one political leader or another. And I think inside of organizations, it's driving, again, a little bit more conflict. And I guess I'd be curious to understand, in an environment where we're trying to drive inclusivity, how can we start to reconcile what you might perceive as your personal values to be the moral way or the right way, with others that might have a differing opinion?
It's very hard, very hard. And I think what we're seeing right now is just completely unprecedented. I've spoken to a number of CEOs and founders who said, when do I say something and when don't I say something, right? There are riots here, there's shootings here. It just seems like every month something is happening. And on the political side, it's extremely difficult when a number of companies are being founded in Silicon Valley and in New York primarily, but they have offices all over the US and perhaps the world. And so one thing I think founders and CEOs do have to be just aware of is the fact that their employees do not always share their political views, because a lot of times they are on the coasts. And so I think that that's just a really tough thing. I have not seen companies do this very well, but I have spoken to a number of people who are more, tend to be more conservative, and they feel left out of tech. They really want to work in tech, but they don't feel comfortable. And I'm not talking about the traditional white male conservative. I'm talking about female conservatives who we want to bring into tech. We need more diversity there. So we have to just be mindful that that it's not just a white male conservative we're talking about here. We're talking about women who really want to be here and who feel excluded.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple of last questions here. What do you see, I think we talk about leadership and leading through what I might call a very ambiguous time, both from a diversity and inclusion perspective, but with technology disrupting the way that we do business. I think leaders are having to change and they have to be a little bit different. What are some traits you think of, particularly inclusive leaders? What do you think that they need to bring to the table?
Yeah, I think the number one thing an inclusive leader needs to bring to the table is just that ability to listen and to listen to their employees and understand that not everybody is like me and that they may have grown up in different parts of the United States and different parts of the world. And so that whole listen to be changed thing continues to pop up into my mind. But I would say the number one thing is to listen. And then move on from there.
Great. And then last question, I know NYC Blend is really focusing on having these events where there are tactical things that we can all go, do tomorrow in our offices. So it sounds like listening is a big one, but any other things that you might add that we can start doing tomorrow?
Yeah, I would say find somebody who's different from you to grab coffee with, to mentor, to sponsor, and go to your office and just ask them, hey, let's go grab a coffee. I'd love to learn more about where your background, where did you come from, where did you grow up, and just start a conversation about where people are from. And I think that really opens up a dialogue of listening. But I think seeking out people that are different from you and who have a different background is a great way to just start building that inclusive culture.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Applause for Kathy. Next up, we've got Alessandra from Human Ventures.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alessandra from Human Ventures. Human Ventures is an early stage startup studio that's located right here in New York. I'm here to talk about our upcoming event. You've heard a little bit from some of the speakers as well as the origin story of NYC Blend, but we're really excited. This will be a year-long series with an event each month. And so on April 2nd, we're hosting an event on mentorship and building out your personal board. Kathy actually said it perfectly and kind of teed me up right here to say, when you think about building out an inclusive environment, part of that is actually ensuring that you are kind of building those relationships and the rapport between the upper level management and the people who might be either entry level or just getting into tech. I know when I personally look back at my career, I think of the people who have made a difference, whether it's in small comments or grabbing coffee or just relationships that I've cultivated and developed that have really changed the trajectory of my career. And so when we look to the second event, we really wanted to build on this idea of an inclusive environment and focusing on what it means to be a mentor and also how to find and identify your mentors. I think one thing that's really important too is many people have this idea of a mentor as being this much older, much kind of storied and very accomplished person who's many years ahead in the future, and taking them out to coffee and seeing them once a month. But there are so many different ways that you can build mentor relationships. In fact, there are peer-to-peer relationships. There could be someone that's outside of your industry. And so what we really want to do with this event is highlight some of those stories and really, from a storytelling perspective and bringing in founders, all either women or underrepresented founders, and telling their stories of how they found their mentors or mentees, actually, and what it means to them. So I hope you'll join us on April 2nd for our event, Mentorship and Building Out Your Personal Board. And again, we are really, as you can tell, we're really excited to be cultivating this community and welcoming in the New York ecosystem into technology and into venture capital. So I really hope everyone will join us, both at upcoming events, but again, joining our mailing list, coming to us as community partners, as attendees, as just really curious minds who can help us kind of continue to cultivate and develop this diversity and inclusion initiative. So I encourage everyone, whether you're watching or whether you're here, to pull out your phones and go to nycblend.com to sign up for our mailing list and, of course, to join us for our upcoming event. Thanks so much for joining us.